What if the people who built the silos weren't trying to save humanity from the end of the world, but were preparing for something they knew was absolutely impossible to stop? Silo Season 3 Episode 8 finally gives us some of the biggest answers we've been waiting for, and at the same time, it makes the story even more disturbing. We finally learn why the founders believed humanity needed the silos, what really happened during Charlotte's mission, and why nanotechnology could be the greatest threat the world has ever faced. But that's not all. Back inside the silos, Juliet and her allies are getting dangerously close to stopping the safeguard, while Bernard is forced to question everything he once believed. And just when it looks like the plan might actually work, Juliet makes one mistake that could put the entire future of Silo 18 in danger. Episode 8 is basically about one question. How far would you go to prevent a disaster that hasn't happened yet? And by the end of this episode, that question becomes much more terrifying than it sounds. One of the most important things about this episode is that Silo finally takes us back to the beginning. For most of the series, we've been trapped inside the mystery of the silos, trying to understand who built them, why everyone is forbidden from leaving, and what could possibly be waiting outside. But Episode 8 finally gives us a much clearer look at the people behind the entire project. And interestingly, the answer doesn't begin with Juliet, Bernard, or even Silo 18. It begins with people who had an almost unimaginable amount of power and money. That's where Paris Stinson comes in. During the episode, he casually talks about having enough money to fund the entire Silo project for 1,000 years. And when he explains exactly how much $1 trillion really is, the moment becomes more important than just a joke about rich people. Because the point is that someone with that much money can actually turn an extreme idea into reality. And Stinson isn't interested in building the silos because he simply wants to create something impressive. He genuinely believes the world is heading toward a disaster that cannot be stopped. That's what makes his character so interesting. He isn't necessarily presenting himself as a villain. In his mind, he's preparing for the future. And the terrifying part is that he might actually have a reason to believe he's right. The episode finally gives Helen, Daniel, and Charlotte the explanation they've been waiting for. They are taken through the silo construction project and eventually sit down with Stinson and Thurman, where the real purpose of the silos is revealed. At first, the explanation sounds almost harmless. Seeds, libraries, the preservation of humanity's knowledge, a place where people could survive until the world outside becomes safe again. But Helen immediately starts asking the questions that everyone should be asking. Why do you need enormous underground cities just to preserve seeds and books? Why all the secrecy? Why build hundreds of silos? And most importantly, what exactly are you expecting to happen to the world? The answer is that the founders aren't preparing for one specific disaster. They're preparing for basically every disaster they can imagine. Nuclear war, climate collapse, pandemics, asteroid strikes, artificial intelligence, and eventually something much smaller, but potentially much more dangerous, nanotechnology. This is where the title of the episode becomes especially important. The gray goo isn't just some strange substance that appeared during Charlotte's mission. It represents an entire technology that could completely change what a weapon looks like. Stinson explains that nanotechnology can be incredibly small, and because of that, it could potentially be used in ways that would be almost impossible to detect. The idea is terrifying because you don't necessarily need a giant bomb or an army to destroy everything. You could have microscopic machines spreading through an environment, and by the time people understand what is happening, it could already be too late. And this is exactly why Stinson keeps repeating the same argument throughout the episode. The end of the world is inevitable. It cannot be prevented. It can only be survived. That belief explains almost everything about the silos. The founders aren't trying to stop the apocalypse. They're trying to make sure humanity survives whatever causes it. And suddenly, all those massive underground structures start making more sense. The people inside them aren't supposed to live there forever. They're supposed to preserve humanity until the outside world can eventually be reclaimed. But there's a huge problem with this plan. If the founders were so confident that the outside world would eventually become safe, why did they create a system where the silos could destroy themselves? And why would one silo be given the power to kill another? The episode starts giving us some answers to that question as well. We learn more about the safeguard and the mysterious connection to Silo 1. For generations, people inside the silos have followed rules without really understanding why those rules exist. Bernard is one of the people who spent his entire life believing there had to be a reason behind them. He did terrible things because he believed the system was protecting his people. He poisoned Judge Meadows because he believed her death was necessary. He followed instructions because he believed the alternative could mean the destruction of his entire silo. But now he's beginning to realize that the reasons he trusted may not have been real at all. His conversation with Juliet is especially important because Bernard finally admits something that completely changes how we should look at him. He doesn't deny what he did. He knows he can't undo it. But he also says that he believed his actions were justified because he thought he was preventing something worse. That's the same logic the founders used when they created the silos. It's the same logic Stenson uses when he talks about preparing for the apocalypse. And it's even connected to the decisions being made inside Silo 18 right now. Everyone believes they're doing something necessary. Everyone has a reason. And yet, those reasons keep leading to death. That's what makes this episode so interesting. Silo isn't simply asking us who is good and who is evil anymore. It's asking whether doing something terrible can ever be justified if you believe it will prevent something even worse. Bernard thought he was saving his silo. Stenson believes he's saving humanity. And now Juliet is trying to save everyone by stopping the safeguard. But what if stopping it creates the exact disaster the founders were afraid of? Meanwhile, the situation inside Silo 18 is becoming even more complicated. Juliet and her group are working toward the safeguard pipe, because if they can stop it from functioning, they may finally be able to protect their silo from Silo 1. But they don't fully understand what they're dealing with. And that lack of information becomes dangerous very quickly. Lucas and Kennedy have already risked their lives trying to reach Silo 17, and their journey proves just how desperate things have become. Lucas is badly injured after being shot by a drone, and Kennedy is suddenly forced to take responsibility for getting both of them to safety. When they finally reach Silo 17, they are met by Solo and the children. The situation is tense because nobody knows whether they can trust each other. But Lucas is losing blood, and there isn't much time to argue. Solo has to step up and try to save him, even though he's been isolated for so long that helping other people doesn't come naturally anymore. And this is another important theme running through the episode. People who once ran away from responsibility are suddenly being forced to take it. Kennedy is one of the clearest examples. His original plan was simple. Get Lucas where he needs to go, then leave. He never wanted to become part of this fight. But after Lucas is injured, he realizes that walking away isn't an option anymore. The fate of Silo 18 is now connected to what happens inside Silo 17. And Kennedy has to convince Solo that they can't give up. Then they discover something that makes the entire situation even more emotional. While searching for the safeguard pipe, they find a sealed section of the silo and discover Jimmy's mother inside. She had welded herself into the room from the inside. At first, nobody understands why she would do something like that. But Lucas eventually figures it out. She wasn't hiding from people. She was trying to stop the poison. She had attempted to cut the pipe and prevent the toxic material from reaching the silo. But she ran out of fuel and realized she couldn't finish the job normally. So she sealed herself inside and sacrificed her own life to keep the poison contained. And suddenly, Jimmy's understanding of his parents changes. His father gave his life to protect him, and his mother gave hers to protect the entire silo. That moment is important because it changes Jimmy's motivation. Until now, death has been something he associates with abandonment. But now he begins to understand that sometimes people sacrifice themselves because they believe someone else has to survive. And that idea connects directly to the founders and their original plan. The silos themselves are basically one giant sacrifice. Thousands of people were placed underground because someone believed that was the price humanity had to pay to survive. But the question remains, who decided that price was acceptable? And as Juliet gets closer to the safeguard pipe, that question is about to become much more dangerous. Meanwhile, back in Silo 18, Juliet and the others are getting dangerously close to the part of the plan that could change everything. They now know that the safeguard is connected to the pipes between the silos, but knowing what to stop and actually stopping it are two very different things. The more they learn, the more complicated the situation becomes. Juliet believes they finally have a chance to protect Silo 18, but there is still one major problem. They don't completely understand how Silo 1 is watching them or how quickly it can respond if they get too close. And that's exactly why every decision they make now feels like a gamble. At the same time, Shirley and the others are trying to keep the plan moving while Juliet is away. They believe they have a way to deal with the poison, but the operation requires them to work outside the normal safety of the silo. They have to expose themselves to the very environment everyone has been taught to fear. And after everything we've learned about what's outside, that's not something anyone should take lightly. The fact that they're even willing to do it shows how desperate things have become. For generations, people inside the silos have been told that going outside means certain death. Now these characters are risking their lives because they no longer trust the people who created those rules. But just when it looks like Juliet might finally have a chance to take control, she realizes something is wrong with their calculations. The two silos aren't positioned exactly the way she thought they were. That means the panel they were planning to attack isn't the correct one. It's a small mistake, but in a situation like this, a small mistake can kill everyone. Juliet understands that she can't simply stay where she is and hope the others figure it out. She has to reach them herself. And while Juliet is trying to stop one disaster, Judicial is preparing another one. Shirley gets a message about a welder named Ralph Melby, and at first it seems like a normal request. But Juliet remembers the name. She knows that Judicial has used that name before, and suddenly the whole thing starts to make sense. This isn't a request for help. It's bait. Juliet realizes that they're being watched, and she knows that someone is trying to draw them into a controlled situation. But there isn't much she can do. If she runs, she could expose the entire group. If she stays, she could be arrested. And eventually, that's exactly what happens. Juliet is taken into custody and brought to seclusion, where she finds herself locked in the same cell as Sims. That moment is especially important because Sims has spent much of the season trying to understand where he belongs. He's been following the system, enforcing its rules, and believing that the people above him know what they're doing. But now he's sitting in a cell with Juliet, the person he's been ordered to stop. And suddenly the lines between right and wrong aren't nearly as clear as they used to be. Then Camille arrives and tells them they've made their choice. She isn't there to negotiate. She's there to make it clear that the people running the silo believe Juliet and her group have crossed a line that cannot be ignored. But Camille is also dealing with her own doubts. She's already questioning her husband's decisions and trying to understand what Silo 1 actually wants. So even though she appears to have control, it's becoming harder to tell who is really making the decisions. And that's one of the most interesting things about this episode. Almost everyone thinks they're in control, but nobody really is. Juliet believes she can stop the safeguard. Bernard believes he can understand the founders. Camille believes she can get information from Rob. Silo 1 believes it can control everyone. But the more these characters fight against the system, the more cracks start appearing. Then Shirley makes it back to Walker's workshop and tells everyone what happened. Juliet is gone. She's in seclusion. The original plan is basically dead. And now the group has to figure out what they're going to do without her. This is where the episode starts feeling like it's preparing for something much bigger. Juliet has always been the person willing to take the biggest risk, but now she's separated from the people who need her most. And the people outside seclusion are suddenly forced to make decisions without her. That could either bring the group together or completely destroy their chances. And there is another problem hanging over all of this. Even if Juliet manages to escape, even if they find the correct panel, and even if they successfully stop the safeguard, they still don't know what happens next. They've spent so much time trying to stop Silo 1 from killing them that they haven't fully answered the bigger question. What happens when the system that has controlled humanity for generations finally stops working? Because that's what makes the safeguard so terrifying. It isn't just a weapon. It's the final piece of control. The silos were built to protect humanity, but the people living inside them were never given the choice to decide whether that protection was worth the cost. And now Juliet is trying to give them that choice. The problem is, she may have to destroy the system before she can prove that they deserve it.